Welcome to the latest edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, and we are proud once again to present the best law firm that there is as part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts, the Coleman and Coleman podcast. Shawn Coleman, Scott Coleman. I pointed my hand the wrong way, but you get the point. Scott, always a pleasure to be with you. How have you been, sir? Hope all's well.
Hey, Sean, I am doing great. The Coleman combo, back at it again. I think it's probably been about 2 months since you and I last did a podcast together, but here we are, what all of America has not been waiting for, but it should be a good show. We have a really special player to talk about tonight, which always makes these episodes really fun to record and hopefully fun to listen to.
Yeah, and we'll get right into who that special player is. A big emphasis on the letter S. But of course, we are Hammer Territory, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts, and we can't go, too long into the show, but I'll let you know all the great content that we got out there. We talked about so many different things. We've talked catching with AJ Przinsky. We've talked Braves minor leagues with Ben Badler. We've talked San Diego Padres rumors potentially with Kyle Glazer. Scott and Brad did that last time. So the whole key is, while we're here for you to enjoy this show, make sure you check out all the great content we've put out since the new year started. But the thing about the offseason, Scott, you mentioned it before. Maybe if you condense the offseason, maybe that would make it a bit more exciting. But the one thing that is a bit exciting about how long the baseball offseason is, you always are on the brink of a major development. And we once again saw that over the past 48 hours. Pete Alonso, who had been one of the more, captivating free agents out there, just, what he may sign for, what's his market like, what wound up not being that fruitful, but he did get a pretty good payday. Going back to the New York Mets, adding more pop to what currently is forming to be one of the better lineups in baseball. We know Pete Alonso. I don't think he's as scary as he was a few years ago, Scott, but without a doubt, when you added him to a lineup with Soto and Vientos and Lindor, that's a pretty daggum good lineup. Yeah. And you know that Pete Alonso can succeed with the Mets.
Yeah, I don't know about you and everybody listening, but in my mind, I just kind of was counting down the days until the Mets and Pete Alonso reunited. I know there was some reported interest from other teams, but it just felt like to me that he was going to end up with the Mets. And yeah, an interesting contract, 1 year, $30 million, and then he has an opt-out after that. I think it's $24 million in year 2, but even then, at most, it's 2 years guaranteed for Alonso. It really just reminded me just how good the National League East is going to be this upcoming year. You have the Braves, you have the Mets, you have the Phillies. Legitimately, that might be 3 of the 4 best teams in baseball, and they're going to just beat each other's brains out all summer long. And it's just shaping up to be an all-time race for the division in the next, 9 months from now, because you have 3 of truly elite rosters, I feel, and also rosters that have some legitimate World Series and 100-win upside. And there's only so many teams in baseball right now that you can say that for.
Absolutely. And the other thing that stands out to me about the Mets, Scott, is that we know how aggressive they are. They are not shy to throw the money around. The thing that stands out to me is that, we don't really have going into the season like a Garrett Crochet level type of pitcher, but, we look at Dylan Cease, we look at Michael King of the Padres, if they may not contend. What I'm getting at is that I think the Mets still have plenty of question marks about their pitching staff, and I'm saying that as a Braves fan. But what is a bit scary about the Mets, I think, is that they're going to go. They've got the lineup. They've got the lineup to win. They are the dark horse when any pitcher's name comes up. They've got the arsenal when it comes to, assets with minor leaguers. They're not going to be afraid from any contract. The thing that stands out to me about the Mets is as good as they've been in adding talent this offseason, they can add even more when it comes to the trade deadline potentially. They have an ability about themselves that most teams don't to still get significantly better.
And I think for years, the Mets have been spending crazy money. And we know that the Braves have just completely dominated this division for 30 years at this point, basically more than my adult life, right? At this point, the Braves have just completely dog walked the rest of the East. But now they have David Stearns running the show in New York, who was about as battle tested as it was in Milwaukee. And it seems like New York has a lot of really smart folks behind the scenes. And then for the Phillies, it's funny. Going into the year, I almost wonder if now the Braves and Mets are going to be the two odds-on favorites to win the division, and Philadelphia will be third, maybe just by a hair, but Philadelphia will be third. And it's easy to forget that the Phillies won this division comfortably a year ago. Maybe not comfortably, but I think it was 5 or 6 games, and they cooled the Jets, whereas the Braves and the Mets had to play up until the very final day of the season. But the NL East is going to be a gauntlet. It's fascinating, Sean. I mean, I want to get your take on this. I was thinking about it earlier. In my mind, I almost feel like the Phillies have the safest floor of those 3 teams. I don't know if they have the highest ceiling, but I do think they have. I think they have the safest floor for a couple reasons. The pitching staff is awesome. They're getting older, but I don't think they're going to hit that age cliff just yet, at least as a whole team. And I think the Mets are fascinating because I think the Mets maybe have the biggest blend of both upside and downside, because I don't know if I trust that starting rotation. The lineup is just fantastic at the top, but towards the bottom, I'm not in love with it. And then for the Braves, I think the Braves have the highest ceiling of these 3, but they also have significant risk, because what if Ronald Acuna Jr. is not himself? What if Spencer Strider isn't himself? What if Chris Sale gets hurt again? And sure, every team has injury concerns, but it really is going to be a super fun and probably stressful summer watching these 3 teams square off, because along with the Dodgers and I guess the Yankees in the American League, it feels like there are a clear 5 best rosters in the game. And it turns out that 60% of them happen to be in our division.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that, yes, the Phillies have the highest floor. They have the best mix of, talent in their lineup, talent in their pitching staff. I think the Mets have the best. I think you could say that they have the best top-heavy part of the lineup. Like if you were to look around Major League Baseball and you were to see where teams are going into this season, what team stands out as second when it comes to the top 3 of an order after the Dodgers, I think you can make a case the Mets could be right there with anyone. But I do agree with you. I think the Braves by far have the biggest assortment of questions, but I also think that they have the potential to be the deepest team, and that's what gives them the highest ceiling. Plus, youth is still on their size compared to especially the Phillies and the Mets. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Phillies best floor. I think Mets potentially have the best potential to catch fire, kind of like they did last year, and the Braves have the highest ceiling. But Scott, I want to pivot a bit as well, because again, we talk about the fact that you have notable names still out there on the free agent market that could certainly be attractive to teams. But one name in particular, I think, has been someone that has interested the Braves all offseason, but they really haven't made a move like many teams haven't, because he has a qualifying offer stuck on him. And we got a question from Twitter that was asking, when it comes to Nick Pivetta, who the Braves have had interest in, when it comes to that qualifying offer and the fact that if you look to sign him, I believe that a team would lose their 2nd and 5th pick in the upcoming draft, when does that stipulation fall off? When can Pivetta be able to sign with the team without having them risk losing draft picks? And Scott, I know that we talked about it a bit earlier. I think we found some info on that question. Very good question, by the way.
Yeah. A few folks have asked about Nick Pivetta, and just as Sean noted, a team like the Braves, who are in the tax, or at least were in the tax, would lose 2 draft picks and international free agent money next summer. So if it's for like a superstar, like if the Braves were just dead set on Willy Adames or just one of the high-end free agents this offseason, then okay, we know how much of a crapshoot the draft is, and even more so international free agent spending. You don't want to just give away your picks and your international money, but for a star that's going to be in your team for a decade, sure, whatever. But because Pivetta somehow took the qualifying offer, it's not a coincidence that he is not signed with a team yet. I mean, Pivetta's fine. I love the idea of him as a back-end starter for this team with some real upside for more, but at the cost of what you're going to have to pay Pivetta and lose 2 picks and international money, just doesn't make a lot of sense for me, even if it is like a bargain 1-year deal for him at this point. And somebody asked about when the qualifying offer penalties drop off. Based on some research, I think Steven, our co-host Steven Tolbert, pulled, I don't think the draft penalties fall off until after the draft, which is July. And the idea of waiting, I mean, Pavetta's not going to wait that long, I don't think. I'm wondering if he just goes back to Boston, because obviously Boston wouldn't lose anything by re-signing him. But yeah, so Pavetta, interesting. I really do feel the Braves would have had serious interest if he did not have all of this qualifying offer nonsense attached. And frankly, it blows my mind that baseball penalizes players like this. But that's a discussion for the next collective bargaining agreement, I guess.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating conversation, one that's been going on for decades, but it seems like that no one who actually has a say in those type of things wants to listen. But
Yeah.
let's talk about arms, and let's talk about arms with upside. And let's talk about one of the biggest surprises that could not have come at a better time. One of the biggest surprises in baseball last year, but could not have come at a better time for the Braves. And that is when Spencer Schwellenbach, Scott, as we're going through, some of the major players for the Braves, in terms of their success in 2025. And Scott, I'll start here. Even before the 2024 season, I think that many were talking about, what about this offseason? What was going to happen when we saw Max Fried and Charlie Morton both become a free agent? And of course, we've seen what many expected to happen, at least for Fried. He left for a big payday with the Yankees. Charlie Morton is now with the Orioles. So what was going to happen? What was going to happen for the Braves, who had some internal options, but who was going to step up to potentially fill their roles? A.J. Smith-Shawver got an opportunity. Oblique injury, despite a good start against the Cubs, out 2 months. Hurston Waldrop looked good for about an inning and a half, and then got rocked in Washington. And then lo and behold, one of the best names that we've seen in a Braves uniform, surprised his name can fit on a Braves uniform, Spencer Schwellenbach comes along and is absolutely sensational as a rookie. Scott, we talk about, the elder statesmen having great years last year, and Ozuna and Sale and Iglesias, but it's hard to top one of the better stories of Braves baseball in recent memory, Spencer Schwellenbach's rookie season.
Yeah, the Braves don't make the playoffs as short as they were. The Braves, there's no chance the Braves would have made the playoffs last season without Spencer Schwellenbach coming out of maybe not nowhere, because it wasn't like he was a 30th round pick who nobody had heard of before. But I don't believe Schwellenbach was on a single top 100 prospect list coming into the last year. The prospect guys at Battery Power, who cover the Braves better than I think anyone, they had Schwellenbach third on their top 25 for the Braves, and credit to them for kind of picking Schwellenbach out of the crowd as a guy who can make an impact. But even the biggest fan of Schwellenbach this time a year ago, I don't know if anybody could have seen him going, I mean, honestly, pound for pound with almost any starter in baseball, especially once he got going in the second half. It's funny. We had Kyle Glazer on the show a few nights ago, and Kyle is a Padres reporter, and I don't expect him to follow Spencer Schwellenbach the way that we all do. But when talking about hypothetical trades, Glazer kind of thought, well, the Padres would probably ask for a Spencer Schwellenbach in a trade for Dylan Cease. And of course, I could hear our listeners yelling at their radio in the car. That's insane. But I think because Schwellenbach was not a Paul Skeens or even a consensus top 100 prospect, that maybe nationally he didn't quite catch on the way that others did. But we're going to talk about some numbers tonight. But Schwellenbach was as good as anybody in the National League, especially once he really hit his groove in the last couple of months.
So we're going to come at this from a few perspectives, right? And, Paul Skeens in the 2024 season, he was one of those rookie sensations when it came to an arm. We're talking about, what we'd seen before, like with the Kerry Wood and, before that, Fernando Valenzuela. Paul Skeens was at that level in terms of the production, matching the hype. But from June 22nd through August 22nd of last year, I tweeted this out right around the end of August, and I don't have the tweet in front of me. Spencer Schwellenbach, over a 2-month stretch, Scott, was just as good, if not better. He was especially better, relevantly better, in the metrics that, showed how good a pitcher he is in terms of what he himself controls. Spencer Schwellenbach was toe-to-toe with Paul Skeens when it comes to productivity. That's how good of a rookie season he had. Now, I'm not saying he deserved Rookie of the Year, but Paul Skeens was a historic rookie-level pitcher, and for much of the season, Schwellenbach was step with him when it came to production.
And here's some numbers to back up what Shawn just said. So basically in the second half of the season, and I always think it's weird that like the first half and the second half for baseball are dictated by the All-Star game. But by the time the All-Star game comes around, you've played like, 110 games or 100 games, whereas it's a 162 season. But I digress. But basically from July 1st on, this is how Spencer Schwellenbach ranked among qualified starting pitchers. He ranked 8th in WAR. 8th. And the only 7 pitchers ahead of him are like bona fide stars, including his teammate Chris Sale, Zach Wheeler, like the best pitchers in the game. And it wasn't fluky in any way, shape, or form because Schwellenbach was 9th in ERA. He was 10th in FIP and XFIP, and he was 11th in his strikeout to walk rate. And if you look at something like Spencer Schwellenbach's StatCast profile or his Baseball Savant page, I mean, everything is impressive with his game. And I mean, there's just so much to be encouraged by for a pitcher who once upon a time was thought of as a real prospect and was a second-round pick for a reason. But as we kind of said, I don't know if anyone had this in the cards for Schwellenbach. And there's just so much here to be excited about. And God willing, let's hope his health cooperates. But just, I mean, you talk about a pitcher who really changed not just last season, but the trajectory of this team and some of the decision-making this team made this offseason. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's not a big panic with the starting rotation right now because of just how good Schwellenbach was last year.
And what made him so good, Scott, Luis Gil, I believe the Yankees rookie, I was looking through some tweets earlier. You put out a fantastic tweet about how Schwellenbach beat Gil in nearly every statistical category as a pitcher. If Schwellenbach was in the American League, he should have won Rookie of the Year. That's how good he was. Now, credit to Jackson Merrill and Paul Skeens. They deserve to be 1 and 2 in the Rookie of the Year voting. I think Schwellenbach clearly was the 3rd best rookie in the National League last year. But one of the reasons why you talked about it, and I'll let you get into your comparison that you came up with before we started the podcast, because I think it's a great comparison. It was the consistency of Schwellenbach being able to not only have a deep assortment of pitches, a deeper assortment than you typically see from rookies, but he could throw any of the pitches for a strike at any time in the count. Now, if you remember, we had some conversations about how he got lucky earlier on in the season because, man, he threw a lot of sliders in that zone. So it was kind of scary that someone was going to connect with it. But as we went along, that slider became a very, very good weapon. But Scott, that it's not only the arsenal that Schwellenbach has, but his ability to utilize it anywhere and any time when it comes to opposing hitters.
Yeah, I mean, Schwellenbach was 24 years old for just about all of last season. And when you watch him out there, I mean, he pitches like a guy who's been doing it for a decade and is in his 30s. And this is really impressive for a guy his age, and not only a player Schwellenbach's age, but the fact that he underwent Tommy John right after being drafted in 2021. So he basically did not pitch the rest of the fall of 21 or all of 2022. So you're talking about someone who basically had a year and 2 months in the minor leagues to get ready. But Schwellenbach threw 5 pitches, and they were legitimately good pitches. Last year, 29% fastball, 20% slider, which you said was just such an effective wipeout pitch down the stretch. He threw a cutter 17% of the time. He threw a curveball 15% of the time. He even has a splitter that he threw 13% and a sinker at 7%. There's not many 24-year-olds in baseball who can come even close to having 5 legitimate pitches in their back pocket whenever they want them. And kind of like Max Fried, he kind of got the sense with Schwellenbach where he had so much in his arsenal that he was never giving the hitter the same at bat twice or even the same pitch twice in a game. Just really impressive. A guy beyond his years, I think. And the fact that he has such good command and isn't just walking everybody, which is such a challenge for young pitchers. The fact that Schwellenbach has full command of those 5 pitches, especially to me anyway, is maybe the most impressive thing he did last year.
A 1.67 walk rate as a rookie. Like, I think that there were a couple of stretches during the season where Sarah Lang's just a phenomenal mind when it comes to baseball. She pointed out, how historic Schwellenbach stretches a few times were of his low walk rate, the fact that he just was so good at keeping the ball in the strike zone. But Scott, another thing that stands out about Schwellenbach, we talk about the fact, in recent years, it's really seemed like the teams who utilize their bullpen the least, that sets them up with the best success for the playoffs. But Schwellenbach, I think in 13 of his last 15 starts, 6 or more innings pitched. He was out there facing lineups 3 times true. We talk about how many Braves in a postseason matchup can be able to go through opposing lineups multiple times. Spencer Schwellenbach showed that capability. We'll get a bit more detailed on that in just a second. But Spencer Schwellenbach being a workhorse while also being very, very good, that's not something you usually see in a pitcher as young as he is. It's a great development for him to be both things.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it just really underscores his command and not issuing walks and not letting innings spiral from him. And the fact that he does a pretty good job of keeping the ball on the ground as well. That's something, sure, maybe you give up a base runner, but if you can get out of your jam quickly with a double play, that's just going to keep your pitch count down and make life so much easier for you. And I know there's no scientific way to quantify this, but man, I think even going back to like Little League days, because everybody can probably attest to this, there's nothing worse than a starting pitcher or pitcher in general who just can't find the strike zone. And I feel like when you have constant action, because you're always having strikes thrown, fielders are going to be more alert. They're not just standing there begging the starter throws a strike. I mean, again, it's kind of more of a metaphorical thing and not a scientific driven idea. But whenever you have a pitcher throwing strikes and keeping the defense behind you loose and active, it's only going to help. And I think, again, man, just even as we were doing some research for this show tonight, I knew Schwellenbach was good. Obviously, we did podcasts after all the starts, and more times than not, it was a good start. But even I was like, wow, this kid is like really, really, really good. And again, for someone who is not a bona fide, this kid can't miss prospect coming up, I mean, even more impressive.
So we talk about the control, we talk about the consistency. But the thing that stood out to me, even early on in the season, Scott, that you saw him make a start against a good team, and you're like, he did pretty good on the road against Baltimore, against the Mets, against the Phillies. You're like, okay, he put together another start. All right, this got to be a fluke. He put together another start. And you're just like, this kid does pretty well against good teams. I looked it up, and here is Spencer Schwellenbach's numbers in 2024 against playoff teams. We're talking about across 10 starts against teams that made the playoffs in 2024. Scott, across 10 starts, going back to being the workhorse, 64.1 innings pitched. So basically 6 2/3 innings each start. 7-0 in those 10 starts with a 1.2 ERA, 56 strikeouts, 9 walks. So we've talked about it for multiple years. The Braves, while they've had quality pitching, can it be trustworthy in the playoffs? Can it maintain health going into the playoffs? We've asked these questions. Spencer Schwellenbach's a workhorse. Spencer Schwellenbach has shown that he can go multiple times. He can go deep in games. But to me, the biggest thing about his rookie season, he was absolute nails against quality opposition.
Yeah.
When you talk about an option that could be there to support a Strider and a Sale in the playoffs, Spencer Schwellenbach is one heck of a third option, I think, for this Braves team for years to come.
That's a great pull. Those numbers are incredible that he was so good against the best teams in the game. Because there are probably pitchers out there where if you really dissected it, it's like, okay, yeah, anyone can be good or most guys can be good against the Marlins and the Pirates and the Rockies and whoever else. But to do it that well, and it's funny, if you ask a New York Mets fan what they think of Spencer Schwellenbach, they'll say a bad word because he just mowed them down. I think about that start he had on a Saturday afternoon at Citi Field. I think it was the start after the Braves had just lost back-to-back games in disastrous fashion. I think it was right after Ramon Laureano had overrun that ball in right field. And then they had that awful squeeze attempt. And I mean, I was like banging my head against the wall. And it was just, that was maybe the lowest point. But I think the next day, Schwellenbach went out there and struck out, was it 13 batters over 7 innings or something crazy? Dude is just so good. Was awesome against the Mets. He pitched in that last series as well against New York. So again, it's the theme of this podcast, and I'll say it one last time, but just such an impressive rookie season for Schwellenbach. And it feels like, based on how good he was at the end of the year versus the pitcher he was at the start, it feels like he can be even better. And if the Braves are going to get 30 starts out of him this upcoming season, I mean, the sky is the limit. And I mean, hell, are you telling me that in October we're talking about Schwellenbach being like a legitimate vote getter for Cy Young? I'm not saying he's going to win the award, because that would be pretty hot take-ish. But you tell me he's going to be on the ballot somewhere, I could see it.
And getting kind of diverting, the conversation away from Schwellenbach a bit more is, I think another aspect of this Braves organization is, we kind of do these position capsules. I guess we could kind of coordinate this one to be, the pitching depth capsule, or, kind of the, the hierarchy of arms in the Braves starting rotation. Of course, many people are going to talk about Hurston Waldrop, and they're going to talk about A.J. Smith-Jobber, King Caminiti, who's now in the system as well. But names like J.R. Ritchie, other names like that I think you would probably put in the back half of the top 10 arms in the Braves system. It stands out to me that those guys could be the names to watch in the Braves system. One or two of them having breakout starts, because I don't think anybody was going to sit here and put Spencer Strider, as soon as he was drafted, at the top of the Braves, minor league rankings. I don't think they were going to do that with Schwellenbach. The Braves have a knack for being able to find these gems, and I wonder if they could do it once again with some of the depth that they have with their arms. I think that watching out for the next one or two big breakout stars in the Braves minor league system when it comes to pitchers, that could be a big narrative to watch this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of been the motto and theme of the Braves during this run of being really, really good is, yes, they've developed top-end talent as well as anybody in the game, but it seems like every summer they just pluck someone out. And I mean, heck, Michael Harris was a well-regarded prospect, and he was called up a couple months into the season. He wins Rookie of the Year and is a 5-tool all-star level center fielder. Similarly, Spencer Strider was not a consensus top 100 prospect by any means, comes up and was arguably as dominant as any pitcher on an inning-by-inning basis as a rookie. It's incredible that the Braves continue to churn out players who maybe are not highly regarded in the eyes of the top 100 prospect lists. And, there are. I'm sure that as we do in the coming months, kind of like our season preview type episodes for the Braves this year, there's going to be a player who we either don't say his name, or maybe we say it one time, and then 9 months from now we're going to be going, man, this guy is having a great year. There's a couple guys in the system. Hopefully Hurston Waldrop can stay healthy and bounce back. I felt like last year was kind of a lost year. Similarly, A.J. Smith-Jobber, sounds like he kind of changed some things and maybe tweaked his mechanics a bit. Hopefully he can stay healthy and make that impact. Even a little deeper down the list, I know Blake Burkhalter has some fans in the organization as a possibility, and a whole bunch more. So we will see, but inevitably we'll do a podcast in July about a rookie who maybe wasn't on our radar, and he threw 6 scoreless that night, and it's his 3rd straight start in a row that's really good, and it just helps your team out so much, because you're going to have injuries and underperformance at times, and the way the Braves have done it the last few years is just so impressive.
So, Scott, it's funny that you mentioned July. And remind me, Scott, because I proposed this same scenario to Steven when it came to Michael Harris II. Remind me once again, where is the All-Star game this year?
It's in Atlanta.
Then, Scott Coleman, I'm going to put you on the clock right now, put you on the spot right now. Is Spencer Schwellenbach a member of the National League team this summer in Atlanta when they take the field? Not that he's going to start the game, but is he a National League All-Star with the game in Atlanta this year?
I like that. That's a great question. Maybe. All right, I'm going to say yes, actually. I'm going to say yes. How about that? Why not? I mean, he pitched to an all-star level last year. He might actually have some competition just on his own teammates. I mean, if Chris Sale wants to be Cy Young again, absolutely. If Spencer Strider wants to come back and be Spencer Strider, awesome. If Ronaldo Lopez wants to carry an ERA in the ones, amazing, right? Like he has some real competition internally. But yeah, I like that. I hadn't really thought about how many players from this team will be at the All-Star game. But hey, that would be a very deserving accomplishment for him. And let's hope that he, again, can stay healthy and everything checks out after throwing a lot of innings last year, the most professional innings of his life by far. That is one thing to note, and the cross your fingers and say a prayer category. But again, man, if health cooperates, I have a hard time seeing Schwellenbach not being good based on everything we've just talked about for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, man, and with all the star name, star power that the Braves have, he could probably get kind of lost in the shuffle. But again, that's why we wanted to do this episode. When you look at the numbers, not only are they quite impressive, but they show that the performance is valid. It's not a fluke. Spencer Schwellenbach could be one of the best starters in the National League for years to come. Scott, as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, anything else from you when it comes to what to look for? Because hey, this time next week, we're going to be having some baseball highlights out there to watch.
That's right. Yeah, baby. I believe pitchers and catchers show up on February 12th, which is less than a week away. The first full team workout is February 18th. I think the first spring game is February 24th or 25th. So yeah, we're going to have baseball here soon in our lives. It'll be great to have the bullpen session videos and the PFP videos. You just got to say a prayer that no one's elbow or shoulder starts bothering them, which is honestly kind of the scary part of everybody starting to really ramp up. But God willing, after everything this team went through injury-wise last year, let's hope that a healthier season is on the horizon. And yeah, we'll be back. I know we're going to probably have a show over the weekend, even with the Super Bowl going. We'll be sure to have another episode soon to feed that Braves itch. And yeah, Sean, this is a lot of fun, buddy. I'm glad the Colemans could get together.
Absolutely. And it's especially fun when you get to talk about yet another young player who's going to be in Atlanta for a long time, and hopefully one that you have confidence will lead us to another championship. But of course, you can find Scott Coleman at Scott Coleman 55 on X/Twitter, myself at StatsSAC. You can find Hammer Territory across all forms of social media, as well as Foul Territory across all forms of social media. And check out the Family of Baseball podcast for Foul Territory. I can't stress this enough. It's a growing Family of Baseball podcast, all quality content. Now, I don't know if it's to the level of Coleman content, but still, probably not, but still good content to follow along.
It's a high bar, very high bar, Sean.
Scott, always a pleasure to do this with you. I hope to do it again soon. Hope all's well on your end, sir. And we'll talk to you again soon. And the same goes for all of you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.